Recently, I discovered in the attic an old book that my father had taken and cut out inserts so that cassette tapes could be inserted to protect them. And there was over 7 hours of tape on his life beginning in 1905 when he was born. And it's very interesting to my grandchildren, certainly. But to the community in Wicomico County and Worcester County, I think it's particularly important because he spends a great deal of time describing life when he was a young kid in 1912. And, of course, we're doing this in the year 2012, 100 years ago. And oh my, the comparison between life then and now. And I think it might be appropriate at this time to sort of review the progress, with all of our blemishes, the progress that's been made in our society. I'm going to narrate just the highlights, hitting on some of the seasons and some of the areas that I think would most interest the public in this short segment. And thank you.
This is a life story of Harry Farrell Baker of Salisbury, Maryland, born November the 8th, 1905, the sixth son of George, the sixth child of George Henry Baker, Susan Richardson Baker, the grandson of Goldsberry Baker and Fanny Smith Baker, also John Taylor Richardson, actually, and Elizabeth Scott Richardson.
For listening to Pack 14.
Another thing I can remember was seeing my first movie. Now, movies were new. They hadn't been out for only very few years, and they were only shown in the big cities. But this man come to Whaleville with a tent and had this movie. It seems it was about a 15-minute movie, and the title of it was The Boy with the Clank. And the entire movie was this boy walking up the street with this plank, and he would turn and knock someone over, and then he'd turn around and see who he hit and knock a couple more people over. And that went on for the whole 15 minutes. That was my first experience of seeing a movie. But the thing that stuck in my mind, I had never seen a big tent. Now, how big it was, I don't know. It probably wasn't very big, but it seemed to me being a little child, it seemed tremendous size, and that made a bigger impression on me than the movie, because while the movie was a novelty to the older people, when you're that age, you just take everything for granted anyhow. I do remember my father had a brother named William, and he also lived somewhere around. I had no idea just whether he lived with my grandfather or what, but I can remember 2 or 3 times that he would come over on horseback and take me for a ride on horseback. I don't remember any more about it than that.
And I were watching Armstrong walk on the moon, and I was reminded of my question to him as I listened to his tapes. Here's a man who had a cavalry horse as his first transportation, worked on a huckster's wagon, worked on ships, first motorcycle ride, worked on trucks, the Model T, saw the Wright brothers type aircraft with 2 chip chairs strapped to it, day trips on the train to Baltimore and Philadelphia, the gramophone, the first radio station, the Edison light bulb, the German jets, World War II, the airship Shenandoah. These were all things that he had witnessed. And I said, what is the most important of all of these things that you've seen to your life? And without pondering too long, he said, son, I think the most important thing to me was toilet paper. And I laughed and then started thinking about it. And he went on to talk about oyster shells and corn cobs and that cold January wind whipping across the bays when they were out in the outhouse. And I thought, yeah, it was funny, but it's also probably the most comforting of all of the innovations brought to man. What it was like in Prohibition years. Remember, he was 15 when the Prohibition started and 28 when it finished, the very years a younger man might be known to partake. He talks about how it was possible to buy legal booze for $5 a pint. You'd have to go to the doctor and pay $1 a visit, and if he gave you a prescription, you could buy for $5 a pint of booze. However, the doctors were a little stringent about this, so there were some doctors who charged $2 a visit, and they were more liberal. So for $6, you could buy a pint of booze. Hold in mind that the average person was making about $15 a week then, paying $5 out for room and board, leaving $10, $6 of which goes to buy a pint of booze. No wonder the Prohibition was such a long, drawn-out affair, and the moonshiners were doing so well. Moonshiners, of course, could outpace the police by these fairly new inventions, these new automobiles. And of course, there was only one, in those years, there was only one dealership available to repair these fast-paced machines. And Harry was the young go-to fellow at the Purdue dealership. And the other interesting thing is that a few people know is that right here from Salisbury was a fellow named Amos Woodcock. General Woodcock was quite well decorated in World War I, but he went on to Washington to be head up the Prohibition unit. Eliot Ness worked for Amos Woodcock, and my father was always one for practical jokes, and so he and his brother produced a moonshine just really for their friends, not a business, called Made in the Shade. And of course the joke was it was made in the shade of Amos Woodcock's house. And he lived, he had an apartment near Woodcock's place, and that's where they produced this drink for their friends. So I'm at this point going to let Harry talk a little about those days.